Well, I'd like to welcome this morning Kent Pandolf, one of the past editors of ACSM's journal, Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise. And we want to just chat a little bit, Kent, about your editorship and the journal and so forth over the years. And I'm thinking that you must have become editor in the early 90s after Peter Raven.
Actually,
Is that right?
Peter was the editor-in-chief for 12 years, from 1988 to the year 2000.
Oh.
And our transition year was the year 2000.
I see.
And I became the editor-in-chief in January of 2001
Okay.
and ended in December of 2005. So I had a 5-year term.
Okay, I was thinking that you started a lot earlier than that. Wow.
Well, I was on the editorial board for about
Long
20 years.
Okay, maybe that was it then. So what was the big challenge when you took over after Peter? Well, it seemed to me there was a lot of changes that started to be made.
Peter had the journal really on the right track. He was attracting really good papers, but he was also having problems, I think, because of the number of papers that were being submitted, particularly international papers. And that's when a glut of international papers started to be submitted. Towards the end of his term, the acceptance rate became very high, and the impress time became very high.
I see.
And in fact, I inherited an impress time of 270 days, or 9 months, which is excessive, and also an acceptance rate of about 45%. So one of my major goals was the time management of the journal to get the acceptance rate down, and that would also contribute to a reduction in the impress time. And I was able to do that.
Had you shifted to that automated system yet that Andy was talking about earlier this morning?
Editorial manager took place, started in July of 2004. So it was a year and a half into my term.
Your term.
Yeah.
And that must have made a real big difference.
It did, but
what
it
you were
also
trying to accomplish.
It also contributed to some more problems, because as soon as we went to an online system, we had even more submissions. So as I was getting the impress time down and the acceptance rate down,
The other side went
bingo.
up.
As soon as we did it, I think we had an increase that year of over 100 submissions.
Wow. That's
But anyway, I was interested in dealing with the gold standards, or the ideal acceptance rates and in-press times, and we achieved that at the end of my term. The ideal acceptance rate for a scientific journal is between 30 and 35%, and I ended up at 32. And the ideal impress time is considered to be between 120 and 180 days, and I ended up at 135.
fantastic.
So I was able to get both of those in line with what they should be.
Yeah.
And Andy's really followed on, continued to keep an eye on those two things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Wow. So you had been, when you took over, the journal was already on a monthly
It was.
format?
It was.
So that you didn't have to do anything there
Not really.
as far as that is concerned. What about the impact factor and so forth? Did you see that improving from
It's
the
really-
late 90s?
Actually, the impact factor has always been good for the journal. My entire term, we were in the top 3 or upper 5% of all journals in our category. And our category is sports medicine, sports science. So sports medicine, sports science category. And there's roughly, on average, 75 journals that are in that category.
I didn't know there were that many.
Yeah. So we were like 1, 2, or 3.
Wow. That's
And there's a couple of ways you can look at it. It's a calculated figure. I think Andy explained that to you. But I look at it more as to the rank order. You know, if you're the first, you're the best.
Yeah.
And if you're second or third, you're not too far off. So
Right,
we
right.
kept it there the whole time.
Oh, that's fantastic. Had Lippincott, Williams, and Wilkins been publishing it then?
It
when
had.
you took over?
Yeah. Lippincott, Williams, and Wilkins has been publishing the journal, if I were to guess, it's in excess of 20 years.
Oh, wow.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
And they're an excellent publisher.
Yeah.
They really are.
It's a beautiful journal. It looks good, and I like the way that. Now, were the sections the same, or did you add from Peter's term the sections of the journal?
Yeah.
The topical areas.
They stayed basically the same. I mean, we have 3 disciplines that are represented in the journal: clinical, basic, and applied science. So we have a section for each of those. And then within each of those, we have subsections. So what I did is I kept the major section titles: applied, basic, clinical science, and then I changed some of the subsections around to better, I thought, better fit the section that it was supposed to represent. The other thing we did is we thought that if anything ever happened to me from a physical standpoint and I had to be replaced for a period of time, there was no mechanism to do that other than to just randomly pick somebody. So what we did is we created an associate editor-in-chief for each of those sections. So the journal had an associate editor-in-chief for applied, basic, and clinical science.
Okay.
And the idea was that if I had to be hospitalized or something were to happen, they could either select one of those 3 individuals to represent the journal or let each of those 3 share in the responsibility.
That's a good idea. Has that continued?
Yes, Andy's continued on with that.
Yeah. And did you, were you allowed to pick new reviewers and so forth?
Yeah.
Associate editor, what do you call them? Not assistant?
Associate editors and editorial board members.
Yeah. So you went through and probably picked some other people or expanded or whatever?
I did both. What I did is I looked at the associate editors that Peter had that were really good at time management and that would also take on a lot of papers. And I kept them. And then I would say about 1/3 of his associate editors were retained. Then I replaced the other 2/3 with people that I knew I thought would be good at time management. And it pretty well worked out.
Worked out well, yeah. Well, what were some of the new things that happened when you became editor?
Oh, there's a number. One, we really wanted to go more molecular. We weren't getting a lot of really molecular-based basic science papers. So one of the big things was we talked to Claude Bouchard, who was interested in publishing an annual review which is titled The Gene Map of Health-Related Phenotypes. And it's really good because it summarizes all the work that's been done for that year in that area, and it's a great review for people that are working at the gene mapping level. What's gone on since then is they've decided to continue it, but it's published every other year at this point in time. But that was one, and you probably remember during my term we celebrated the 50th anniversary, and there were a series of historical perspectives that you had some input into that were published. Those are 2. Okay. And then we tried to broaden some of the areas. We weren't necessarily attracting as many clinical papers as we want. We always had plenty of applied and basic papers, but more clinical-oriented papers, so we kind of reached out through our clinical associate editors to get more submissions along those lines. That would be another thing.
Did the size of the journal stay pretty much the same as far as pages and so forth? Right?
One of the things that we had to do initially to get the acceptance rate down and also the in-press time down was to buy some pages, and that was an agreement I had with the college before I started, which was to buy some additional pages initially so we could publish a few more
Get
papers
some of the backlog.
to get
out.
some of the backlog.
Yeah.
And that occurred really in the first year or two of my term. But once we got that done, the pages pretty well, there's a slight increase in pages each year, but it's really nominal. So the page count more or less stayed the same.
What about relationships with the publications part of ACSM? It seems to me Mark Robertson is always so great to work with. I'm sure that went well, and he was always very supportive, I would imagine.
Mark and I have had a great relationship over the years. Before I was the editor-in-chief of Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise, I was the editor-in-chief of Exercise and Sports Sciences Reviews.
Yeah.
And kind of during all of this time, I was also the chair of the Publications Committee for 10 years.
Okay.
So in terms of working with Mark, I mean, I've known him I started working with him in the 80s, and as an editor of another one of the college's journals, I had to work with him directly. So Mark makes it all happen. He really does.
I agree.
If you have a problem, you go to him, and it's really resolved in short order.
Yep, I agree. Thanks for reminding me. I wanted to talk to you about ESSR. When you were editor, they were still on the larger format, right?
They were. It was called the Red Book.
The Red Book, yeah. And when were you editor? Was that in the 80s then?
86 to 90.
80s, okay.
And I don't know when it was, the person that took over for me was John Halozzi, and it was still the Red Book for him. So it was somewhere, I guess, in the
we could get the
late
exact
90s
date.
that they went to the...
And that was an annual volume,
It was.
So,
And it was designed for, at least in my mind, it was designed in part for a purpose. These were usually 15 reviews that were detailed. They were extensive,
Yes.
long reviews.
Right. Yeah.
But it was also designed in some ways for the use of, let's say, a 15-week college course, a special topics course, where, let's say, the students were to review a chapter a week for that course. And I thought the extended reviews had a value.
I personally really liked those reviews because they were long, they were in depth.
The real problem with it was economics and cost. It wasn't cost effective to publish a book of that sort. Book publication costs are really, hardcover are high.
Yeah.
And so the college was continually losing money on this venture. And that had something to do with them deciding to go to a journal format.
Yeah. Was it difficult to get authors to do those, Ken?
Absolutely not.
No. Wow.
No, I mean, you
Because
could...
that was a hard assignment, really.
Yeah. Well, we had associate editors, too, and they were representing all of the key areas of the college.
And then they could recruit
They would
people.
recruit somebody,
I see.
and then that individual, that associate editor, would discuss it with me, and we would make a decision as to who was the best, and off we went.
Okay. Getting back to MSSE, I know we had talked yesterday, and you had been doing some looking into some data and so forth, and I'm probably missing something. I wondered if there was something that you had come across that you wanted to talk a little bit more about this morning, as far as when you were editor of the journal.
Well, one of the things that I'm kind of proud of is, I think I told you that one of the former editors was my undergraduate mentor at Boston University, and that's Howard Skip Knudkin, who I guess you'll be talking to later on.
Later today, yeah.
I'm really proud that, I was a student of his, an undergraduate student of his, and kind of proud that there is a student-mentor connection to editors of the journal.
Yeah. Well, he did something right. Okay, so when I was talking to Andy, we were talking about the the way things have become more computerized and so forth over the years. And I just don't think this was much of an issue early on, was it, when you were editor? I mean, was everything coming out so quickly on the internet at that time? Or
I think the problem that was occurring was the growth of the journal never stopped. I mean, we were getting, if you compared submissions from 2000 to 2001 and then 2001 to 2002, it was ever increasing. And so the management, the sheer management of manuscripts without a computerized system required more editorial support at the National Center. So I think it was really Mark Robertson again that looked kind of, the writing on the wall was, if we don't go to something more electronic, and really all the other journals were, or were already, or were thinking about it, we were going to get inundated with papers. And that had a lot to do with, you know, taking the responsibility off of the editorial office in Indianapolis and giving us a system that in a lot of ways works for itself. So I think it was a really smart move. The flip side of it was, with the advent of the editorial management online system, people found it just a lot easier to submit papers. So there was a huge increase in submissions in the year 2005, which was the first full year that it was in place. And so we had to then deal with that.
Yeah. Well, I remember when they put that editorial office in the National Center in Indianapolis, and I think before that, probably in some of Peter's time, that was all, he had to do a lot of that back at his home location, I think, you know, before that was more centralized. But when you became editor, it was already at Indianapolis, right?
It was.
The editorial office.
The staff,
so you had the staff.
The staff increased when I became editor because Peter ran most of the show out of his own office.
That's what I thought, yeah, okay.
But they also, the problem that was occurring also was there was editorial support need for ESSR and current topics in clinical medicine.
Yeah.
So they had to have support for not only this journal, but the others.
And the ESSR, too.
Correct.
The new format.
Yeah.
So it made sense to have it all there in
It did.
one office.
And I had a part-time editorial assistant working with me at Natick. So it wasn't that I was there just doing it all myself. I had somebody who was working in the order of 20 hours a week, or what was ever necessary, to help process stuff at my
That's
end.
good. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we just have a minute or so left. Kent, is there anything else that you wanted to say about the journal that I haven't asked you about? Or?
It was really the last big undertaking that I accepted before I retired. I'm retired now. I'm a consultant for the U.S. Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine, but it was something that I really wanted to do as the final feather in my cap for my career.
Yeah,
and I'm really glad I did it. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's also a very rewarding experience to have had.
Yeah, everybody I've talked to just thought you did a fantastic job and really moved the journal another whole level from when, you know, it sort of evolved, but really made it a much better journal during
It was a lot of
your
fun.
editorship. So,
It really was a lot of fun.
yeah.
And there wasn't much that needed to be fixed. It was more the process, the time management of the journal. That was the major thing. The science was always there and always has been there.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Kent, well, thanks so much for chatting this morning a little bit.
I really appreciate it.
It's always fun to talk to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.